Given that there's zero support that I can detect in polls for these immigration policies, which are permanent, change the country forever, how is democracy functioning if something this central to a nation's identity, who lives in the country, is taking place without any input at all from the citizens who already live here?
Taking place not only without their meaningful input, but also setting things up so that non-citizens can and will vote in elections. That's why I've spent the last few months, trying to push the SAVE Act, trying to attach it to the spending bill. The SAVE Act would make it so that you can't vote in a federal election without showing some type of proof that you are a U.S. citizen and therefore eligible to vote.
Who would be
US
against
elections.
that?
All Democrats. All Democrats are against it. Now, it passed the House, actually, with bipartisan votes. All the Republicans plus a handful of Democrats voted for it over there. All the Republicans in the Senate supported it, but Senate Democrats blocked it. Now, they blocked it by saying, first and foremost, well, non-citizens don't vote. They can't vote. And anybody who says otherwise, it's, misinformation campaign, which is what they say about anything they don't like.
Well, then what's wrong with banning it?
Well, that was my question to them always. If it doesn't happen, then we're banning something that doesn't happen. But it's already illegal. Yeah, it's already illegal, but there are all sorts of things that are already illegal that are too easy to carry out, and that's why you need to have some penalties attached to it, which is what the SAVE Act does. It would require the states to ask for some type of proof of immigration status and require the states to cull through their voter registration files to remove non-citizens periodically, and then it imposes a criminal penalty for anyone who knowingly gives a ballot or a voter registration to a non-citizen. So here again, what we've got are laws that have been easy to circumvent. This would have fixed it, and they said it's not necessary because they don't vote because they can't vote. Only every day, Tucker, it becomes more and more apparent that people are getting onto the voter registration files, being non-citizens, because of the Supreme Court's interpretation of the National Voter Registration Act, where they said the states cannot ask for proof of citizenship. And where in all 50 states now, you can apply for and get a driver's license as a non-citizen. And when you do that, if you fill out the NVRA part of the form, you check a box and sign your name, then you are a registered voter, even though you're a non-citizen. And so this is troubling. Meanwhile, you've got the American people who are being ignored.
Wait, and all 50 states issue licenses to illegals?
To non-citizens. All 50 states do. In roughly half of the states, a little more than half of the states, I believe, they will also issue them even to illegal aliens. But in all states, as a non-citizen, you can apply for a driver's license. Now, the purpose of the 1993 National Voter Registration Act.
Motor voter,
was to make it easy to fill out a driver's license application and simultaneously register to vote. The problem is it makes it way too easier. We've now got 30 million plus non-citizens in this country. And it's so easy to apply for a driver's license today. You add to that the Supreme Court's bad ruling, a bad interpretation of the NVRA, saying the states can't ask for voter ID, and you've got a problem. You add all of that to this major overhaul of immigration policy, undertaken without the consent of the American people, contrary to their will, where the administration is basically just effectively rewriting immigration law by refusing to enforce vast swaths of it. And that's the mess we're in today.
I mean, how could a Republican ever get elected if you've got a brand new electorate brought in by the Democratic Party, given all kinds of free things that American citizens don't get, made dependent on that party for its life? Like how could you not become a one-party state?
Well, that's the whole idea, Tucker. Remember, the country immediately to our south, Mexico, was ruled by one party.
The PRI,
for most of the 20th century, almost the entirety of it. It was ironically called the Revolutionary Institutional Party.
My favorite name of any party ever.
Both revolutionary and institutional, but they managed to do it. I think the Democrats, whether they realize the PRA angle or not by name, I think that's what they're trying to do here. Think about what they do. So they've brought in 10 million plus non-citizens. They've then shipped them strategically to different parts of the country. Many of those will end up being able to vote, since the SAVE Act, much to my dismay, wasn't attached to this spending bill. If that happens, they may well seize control of things they wouldn't have otherwise controlled. I hope it won't happen, but it could. Once they're in, if Democrats have a clean sweep, meaning they get the White House, they keep the Senate, they take back the House of Representatives, Kamala Harris has made known her agenda to nuke the filibuster in the Senate. And with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin out of the picture, it'll be easier for them to do that if they've got the majority. Once that happens, they will pack the Supreme Court. They will pass voter registration and voter reform bills that will take a lot of the discretion to draw legislative districts away from state legislatures. They'll add D.C. and Puerto Rico as states and make a couple of other changes, including to our campaign finance laws, that together will make an indefinite, perpetual Democratic majority in the United States Congress our new reality. They'll be the pre-party, but for the United States.
You really think they would add Puerto Rico in the district?
Yes, and by so doing, they'll get 4 additional Democratic senator seats. For the foreseeable future, all 4 of those would be predictably, reliably Democrats. And I think that's part of what they've got in mind. But what they want is to not have a meaningful opposition party. You can already tell that they want this by the way they speak. But I thought they were
defending democracy. That would end democracy.
No. Look, their conception of democracy is not actually about citizen input. It's about something else. It's about achieving the size, scope, reach, and power of government in general and the federal government in particular. It's about enhancing their ability to carry out their radical, progressive Marxist objectives. And that's what they want to do. They see the rest of us as illegitimate and as obstacles to that task, and therefore people who are deserving of being canceled, of having our votes diluted and not counted.
Do you think that'll happen?
I sure hope not. I pray daily that it won't. But it is our duty as citizens of this great republic to sound the voice of alarm when we see a risk of that happening. And I certainly see that risk here. Look, these really are perilous times, and we can't afford any longer to sugarcoat what it is that they're doing. And what they're doing is really, really dangerous. We've just got to be strong enough to stop them.
So you've seen all kinds of indicators pop up in media outlets that exist really for the people who run the Democratic Party. The Atlantic and the New Yorker specifically, and others, have run pieces recently saying the Constitution is an impediment to progress.
Yes.
You heard John Kerry say it the other day. The First Amendment is the problem. That's not accidental, is it?
No, it's not accidental, nor is it insincere. These guys mean it. They genuinely mean it. Because look, first and foremost, if you view the ultimate objective as being democracy, which I don't think they do, but let's just go with me on this. If they view the ultimate objective as just democracy, as pure as we can get it, then the Constitution is itself an impediment to that. The Constitution is designed to be counter-democratic in its operation. It's designed to be an intermediating filter of sorts between pure democracy and the rights of the people. In fact, that's the only reason you have a Constitution, is to limit the power of government so that it doesn't become abusive of the rights of the minority. That's the Constitution and its purpose in a nutshell. So if the Democrats love this idea of pure, unrestrained democracy so much, I don't believe that's really accurately explaining what they want, but if that were what they want, then it would make sense for them to try to trample on it. But of course, what they want is something much more sinister than that. They want consolidation of the power of government, whereas the Constitution requires distribution of power. It requires it to be diffused so that no one person or group of people gets too powerful. And so as a result of all of that, you see them being doubly contemptuous of the Constitution. The Constitution protects the rights of the minority, including heretics like you and me who dare to challenge the assumptions of the governing woke elite. And the Constitution is also a threat to their ability to carry out their Marxist-inspired, far-left, radical progressive.
But if you're attacking, I mean, the word treason's been thrown around quite a bit over the last 8 years. But if you're attacking the Constitution, I mean, is that treason?
Yes, I believe it is. Look, we've all sworn an oath. Those of us who hold public office in the United States are required under Article 6 of the Constitution to take an oath to it. And I think if you violate that oath, I do think that is treasonous. So those who are taking this position, I think, are taking an indefensible position, one that I think could fairly be described as treasonous.
How widespread do you think in Washington is the view that the Constitution is the problem?
Well, I'm seeing some alarming trends in this regard. Democrats are much more forceful about it, much more upfront. Sometimes you can feel from some Republicans feeling frustrated about particular provisions, but Republicans will at least always pay lip service to it, and I think with some degrees of sincerity. What I'm seeing now for the first time, I've been in the Senate now for 13 and a half years. When I first got to the Senate, nobody in elected office would dare to be caught dead saying something that could be interpreted as contemptuous toward the Constitution. And yet now you routinely hear members of Congress, Democrats, referring to features of the Constitution as incredibly problematic, like, for example, the Electoral College. They hate the Electoral College. They absolutely despise it. And they will refer derisively to the Senate as a non-representative, as a sort of disenfranchising form of inequality. Because the whole point of the Senate is that the Senate has to involve equal representation among the states. Even if you amend it to say that each state will have a different number than 2 senators, Article 5 of the Constitution, which governs the amendment process, says that there's one type of amendment that is preemptively unconstitutional. You can't change the principle of equal representation. They hate that. Why? Well, because a lot of their voters are focused in a smaller handful of states, heavily populated urban centers, and they think it's profoundly unfair that a smaller state like Utah or Maine will get 2 votes, while a heavily populated state like California or New York will have only 2 votes in the Senate.
Is there anything they can do about that?
In my opinion, no. I mean, they could amend the Constitution, but like I say, Article 5 makes that the one type of constitutional amendment that is unconstitutional. I had this conversation with Justice Scalia once, who posited to me that maybe they could change it, but it would require 2 successive amendments to the Constitution. First, you'd have to amend out the part that says that you can't change this, and then you'd have to actually change it. Regardless, amending the Constitution to undo the Electoral College or to change equal representation in the Senate is something that is nowhere near having the kind of support you would need right now to change it. But I do worry, now that you've got one major political party that is openly contemptuous of at least those 2 provisions of the Constitution and becoming more contemptuous every day of the First Amendment, including not only the freedom of speech protections, but also the freedom of religion protections. I worry that a chill wind blows in America when you've got a major political party that is still being taken seriously when it hates the Constitution, especially provisions as fundamental as those.
So, I mean, packing the Supreme Court would solve the problem. You don't have to amend the Constitution. You just change its meaning.
Right. The old-fashioned way. And what FDR figured out was that FDR could threaten to pack the court and so threaten the court that some justices would change their votes. I write about this in a book I wrote a couple of years ago called Saving Nine. He threatened to pack the court. It didn't work. But one of the reasons it didn't work is that it worked in a different way. It threatened the court into adopting lock, stock, and barrel FDR's loose interpretation of the Commerce Clause, and we've never been the same since. That's what they want to do. They want to either force the issue to the point where they can change the law. Now, in the case of court packing, it doesn't actually require a constitutional amendment. It's simple legislation. But it's the type of legislation that, while not unconstitutional technically, could undo the whole constitutional structure, and that scares me to death.
And you think it's possible?
Yes. Not only possible, Tucker, but if they get the majority in the House and keep the majority in the Senate, and they get the White House, they will do it. And they will do it within the first 100 days they're in office. That should scare every American. If there's anyone within the sound of my voice who is thinking about voting for Harrison Walz,
they will increase the number of seats on the court.
Without question. Absolutely. I believe
on what grounds?
Well, Tucker, democracy, of course. I mean, they'll come up with something. They'll say democracy because they think that answers everything. They'll say climate change, or they'll say racism, or a lot of them will say things like, well, we've got more circuit courts of appeals now, so we've got to increase it to reflect that. That's nonsense. Look, there's not a lack of human resources among the 9 justices on the court. That's not an issue. They just want to increase the number of justices for one simple reason, because they don't like the fact that there is a court now controlled by a majority that's content with reading the Constitution based on what it says, rather than on the basis of what progressive Democrats wish it said.
In the first 100 days, you'll think they'll do? I mean, that's Absolutely. The most radical thing I can imagine.
Yes, but they are radicals, and they're unapologetic about it. If they have the opportunity, meaning if they run the clean sweep where they control all 3 levers within the 2 political branches, they will do it.
Well, they're not too far from that, really.
Yes. Well, it wouldn't be all that hard for them to do it. And that's one of the reasons why I've been so worried about this election and making sure that it's actual U.S. citizens who are voting, is because this election really is consequential, just given how different the 2 competing visions of these 2 political parties happens to be. We saw that on display tonight in this debate in great detail. I mean, I would ask you the same question. Do you think that we saw a contrasting vision from the 2 parties? Because in my view, tonight we saw a greater contrast between these 2 candidates than we've seen in a long time.
Ever.
Certainly in our lifetimes.
And just the level of thinking, I mean, really, it's a cliche, but it's true. It really was 3 against 1, and the 1 outshone the 3 with ease. Just on something as small as it's not small, but as specifically as the housing crisis, the increase in the cost of housing in the United States. And J.D. Vance makes this very obvious point that, more people means higher costs, because there's this thing called supply and demand. If more people want something, it's price rises, right? If you have a limited supply, a growing demand, it's just like it's first grade math. And Tim Walz goes, well, can you find a study that shows that? Yeah. And then JD says, well, actually, I think the Fed just did a study the other day that shows that in great detail, but you don't need to point to a study.
The Federal Reserve Bank, we'll send that to you.
Yeah, but then the moderator's like, yeah, do you have a study? I don't know. I mean, you've got to set, it takes a year to build a house. You got 25 million new people. Like, of course, look, it's true in every country in the world. It's true in Canada right now. It's true in Australia. It's true everywhere. So, like, anyone who demands a study to prove something that obvious is like an idiot.
Absolutely. And especially when they ask for it and it's already been provided by the Federal Reserve Bank, which Democrats generally love, by the way.